Hi everyone, welcome to this new webinar where we will talk about risk transfer. And we will talk about that topic together with Dan Adamson, who's CTO and also co-founder of Armilla, which is an AI risk transfer solution provider. And of course, as this is a fairly new topic, we will focus primarily on exactly understanding what AI risk transfer is and how that actually relates to AI and model risk management, which is, say, the general topic of this webinar series. So let's get started then, and welcome, first of all. So how would you explain, or can you explain how you got to know about model risk management in general?
Yeah. Um, I've done a few AI startups, and the first one was very consumer centric in health and search, and was sold off to Microsoft and helped them on Bing on their search engine, and then moved over and did an AI company that focused on anti-money laundering and anti-fraud solutions using AI, and it was early days there. And we had a lot of, even post selling, we had a lot of trouble deploying, getting these, what I'd call fairly material systems into production, dealing with model risk management teams, the different validation processes, all the way up to the regulators to get them comfortable with these solutions, and realized that there was a bit of a gap. A lot of the teams at the time hadn't dealt with AI systems or solutions, and had standard practices like having to replicate your, essentially, I was asked for the decision trees and could they replicate them, and we had to go through and say these weren't decision trees, and so there was a lot of mutual sort of educating, and got exposed to model risk management and realized that there was a big gap at the time in how they thought about, or how they would think about AI. When we sold that company off, ultimately was successful, but very painful, long deployment processes to get these models out. Um, we, my ex CTO at the time, and then another co-founder, Karthik, was at Element, and we said, this is a wider, broader issue, and we started to focus on how to test AI systems and how to quantify risk, and thereby be able to trust these systems better, right? And that's a lot of the problem with adoption to AI as you move into enterprises, and as you move into more material areas of these enterprises, especially in regulated areas like the financial sector. How do you trust these systems? And so started to build a platform to quantify that risk, realized that all the data scientists had a ton of different approaches and testing tools, and we started to focus on independent assessments, and then started to focus on risk transfer solutions, which we'll talk about more. But the whole idea there is to create a more trusted ecosystem that goes through the right processes and has the right maturity to get to a point where you can start to offer warranties or guarantees or insurance offerings for these systems and for these models.
Okay, that's a fairly interesting introduction. Actually, you mentioned quantification of AI risk, which is obviously an extremely interesting question. Just as a side remark or a side question here, um, when we think of, say, traditional model risk management, we will always try to risk tier the models, try to identify which models would represent a high amount of risk versus the lower ones. And part of the assessment of risk tiering is qualitative, and another part is more quantitative. And even if we just focus on the quantitative part of that question, then there are still plenty different methods. Some are very simple, like trying to understand how many findings are there or how many post-due validations would be there. Others are fairly sophisticated, especially like in valuation models. People play with different types of numeraires to estimate the amount of uncertainty on the model. Can you comment on like what were the methods that you were investigating when dealing with quantification of AI risk?
Yeah, yeah. Well, good. We're diving right into
Yeah,
it. That's great.
exactly. Before we just quickly, right?
Yeah, no, okay. I'll try at a high level. You're absolutely right, and I think one of the themes from today would be, if anyone can take some themes away, it would be that model risk management, as it moves to start testing AI systems, moving from simpler systems, and it's really a spectrum, right, in terms of their complexity and their scale. And there are new risks that you have to think about, but it's definitely the same foundation.
Mhm,
Everything applies. The best practices still apply. So your best practice of looking at qualitative measures and quantitative measures still absolutely apply.
mhm,
The best practice of having these checkpoints, thinking about risks both in terms of what's the probability of them occurring as well as the severity if they do occur. All of that applies. So it's not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Where it gets challenging is with some of these models as they get more complex and they get less transparent into how they're producing outputs or outcomes. Um, you need to think about how to test that specifically. And so
yeah,
our early focus, all of that's a long-winded answer to say
that's okay.
our early focus there was on the more quantitative aspects
Mhm,
and taking things like deep learning models at the time and saying, okay, how can we measure robustness? How can we look at, if not transparency, we looked at methods like Anchor and Lime and
mhm,
Shapley and that stuff. But how do you look at interpretability as well? Meaning, can you get sort of an output of a sense of how these models are performing, and does that make some intuitive sense if they can start to answer
mhm,
that? And then generative AI came along, and again, um, an extension, but as you have different modeling approaches, just like you did before, where you have GLM or a different, a decision tree or C4 5 decision tree going way back, you have these different approaches. You should understand their strengths and weaknesses and how to
mhm,
test them, and they might be different approaches depending on the type of model, and there is different risks depending on the type of model. That absolutely theme continues. And so when we
yeah,
started to test generative AI, there were a new set of approaches. The surface area of attack of a lot of the generative AI models is very broad, and so we had to come up with new approaches to
mhm,
to test those in particular. So
okay,
we very much focused on the quantitative side. Things like robustness are very important for as you want to understand sort of risk transfer, how something will perform in production. But the two are, looking at this from a risk transfer perspective and looking at it in general from an enterprise risk perspective. They're very, they coincide very much.
yeah.
So it's like taking a lot of the best practices and extending them towards these new models where you might need new and different approaches.
Mhm. Okay, well, thanks for this clarification, and it's a relief that the same approach still applies in a way. And then
And
talking,
actually, it's more important than ever, right? You could argue, right?
yeah,
So
absolutely. And yeah, talking about risk transfer, so could you maybe help us understand what's the exact mechanism? What does risk transfer try to aim for? And how should we look at it in the broader context of, say, AI risk management?
yeah, so so there are a few different risk transfer approaches. The whole concept in general is that if you can come in with a certain level of maturity and there's a certain level of confidence that your models will behave, and we can test and show that in an assessment, um, we can we can then take some of that residual risk and transfer that to a third party. And generally that's insurance. It would be, broadly a risk transfer solution. So we're working with some of the top carriers, the Lloyd's market, with Chaucer and Light Re. We're working with Swiss Re as well on those types of insurance solutions. So if you are deploying an AI system, and that AI system might have been built by yourself or might be a system from a vendor that you're deploying, there's some residual risk there. And if we can assert that it's at a certain level of maturity, then we can ensure that offering, so that if things go wrong, you're covered for that, just like any other insurance offering. But we're trying to raise the bar when we do that, meaning that if you come in with a full-fledged model risk management program, that's something we feel safe versus if you're just throwing something together. So we're trying to raise the bar as we do this, and the systems that have shown that level of maturity will end up being eligible for insurance. The other risk transfer solution that we have actually already launched and is around a warranty or guarantee of an offering, of a third party offering. And so if you're an enterprise and you're procuring a third party AI system, we can probably offer a warranty on that after assessing that system. And so that means that a vendor can get their system assessed. If it reaches that level of bar, then we can offer a guarantee of its performance. And that performance might be, as simple as, accuracy or precision. It's defined by the use case, but it could also be around bias as well, right? And so in a lot of HR system examples, that's very critical. If you are looking for anomalies and it's true positives that you care about, then we can offer a guarantee on that as well. So it's a flexible program that makes enterprises more comfortable buying these solutions, knowing that that is backed by a warranty, that's backed by the Lloyd's market and Swiss Re and
Mhm.
us.
Okay, well, I have a million questions around this. Let's try to prioritize some of them a little bit. So maybe first talking about the insurance of AI risk. Um, when I think about, say, specific insurance products, then they always cover a particular type of, or they're being used in a particular type of context, right? Like if I have a car insurance, it's to insure me against issues I might have with the car or cause with that car. When we think about AI applications, the applications are can be almost everything. So how can you come up with a framework or with a methodology that is able to deal with such a high variety of cases?
Yeah. Great question. And that's why sort of the foundations of model risk management are sort of apply. And so you do absolutely have to look at the use case, and we're generally ensuring um, on a use case basis.
Hmm.
And so if you have an HR system that is, for resume screening, we have to look at that and insure it for that use case. If you are dealing with a loan credit adjudication system, that maybe it's a third party system or a chat bot that's a consumer facing chatbot that's built off of a foundation model. Those are different use cases, and uh, there's different risks and there's different coverages there possible. We're starting out, and this is launching in the summer, but we're starting out with a subset of um, some of the use cases. Actually, we're going to be fairly broad with use cases, but some of the potential risks may not be covered initially.
Hmm.
They're being covered other ways. So
Okay.
and there's reasons for that. So, for example, copyright risk, we're letting that play out in the courts a little bit, right? So that's something that there's this inherent risk. The courts have yet to really have a definitive ruling on this. We're on the sidelines, but what's happened is that the foundation model providers are actually offering indemnities. Most of the big ones are now offering indemnities around copyright risk, particularly. So there will be carve outs. This won't be universal. We have to go at this carefully, but it will give broad, important coverages where there are those gaps today, and it will be on a use case by use case basis.
Okay, yeah, that's helpful. And I guess that's also partly already the answer of the second question I had in mind, which is more related to how do you disentangle different risks, different types of risk. And what I mean here, if say, if you work in a traditional model or AI risk management setting, then clearly if you deal with an AI system, there is, say, the risk related to the model itself, but obviously that model is being used on, say, specific infrastructure. That infrastructure might be owned by a third party. So there are all kinds of additional risks like third-party risk or infrastructure risk, security risk, that all come together and when you use the algorithm. So then when something goes wrong, my question would be then, how do you disentangle all of that information, all of these relationships to basically decide whether or not something falls under, say, a particular type of insurance or not?
Yeah. And it's actually a complicated landscape that we could
Mm-hmm.
take the whole rest of the talk, but we won't on.
Yes.
But there's a few parts to it. We're choosing to focus on certain areas of risk that we think are gaps
Mm-hmm.
that, but are not necessarily business risks in the sense that, you know, when you go to deploy a model and you know that its performance level is, you know, such a performance level, and you choose to deploy it because you think it's net beneficial. And there will be cases where it's wrong because it is a model, and you
Mm-hmm.
know that
Exactly.
percentage of cases, and that's, you know, intrinsically your business might choose to take that loss when they're wrong. Um, we're not focused on that type of risk. We're more
Okay.
focused on, hey, we want to cover you if there is third party liability issues, or you know, there's things that happen that you need protection from that aren't part of the actual business operations side.
Mm-hmm.
Now that might change over time, but that's our current thinking. And the second part to that is that there are real legitimate concerns, and as we see these lawsuits flowing through, um, insurance carriers are looking at their traditional policies, and they're either mostly silent on whether they will cover AI risks,
Mm-hmm.
or they've started to exclude some of these, or that will get flushed out as, you know, you have these claims, and companies either get denied or not, and then that then flushes through the court system as well.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of carriers this time through are being proactive and saying what's eligible or not. And so if you look at your different types of insurance, if something is caused by an automated system, it might not be covered a lot of the time, and it's not considered a cyber risk a lot of the time. Uh, so there are these gaps, and
Yeah.
I think the industry is going to become more clear over time, and you know, there are times, I think, where a lot of enterprises will want to be proactive and fill those gaps
Yeah.
proactively.
Okay.
On the warranty side, the guarantee side, just there, it is very concrete when we have a performance warranty or guarantee. It's very concrete on what we're covering, right? Like it's a
Yes.
specific, and to make it fair to everybody, it's it would be something that you've measured in your model risk assessment. Like this is something that, you know, you would pick a metric that is measurable, that is, you know, you have a definition, and that's why, you know, standards are important and that we all are talking on the same page. But our approach there is to embrace those standards and pick metrics that are well defined, so that we have a common language to say when something is underperformed or not.
Mhm. Yes, that's very clear. And actually, you already came quite close to the answer to my third question, still, which was on the liability and guarantee side. Indeed. So you mentioned that it's, for instance, a guarantee with respect to the performance of a model. And you already also clarified that you focus really on the use case. So I understand that that helps in quite accurately defining the performance. Of course, controlling the use case itself is always a bit of a challenge. We have well, in model risk, we call it representativity issues. In AI, it's slightly more fancy, and you call it maybe data or context drift, but it's kind of the same thing all the time. No, and for instance, Gen AI applications controlling the context or the use case itself is a fairly challenging exercise, I would say. So how do you think this will be applied to more generic Gen AI applications?
Yeah, I mean, we struggle with the generality of these for
Mm,
like all the way through the chain here. You know, how do you test these properly? How do you ensure coverage? How do you, um, how do you button down on the security front of these systems? There's generally, when you get to the enterprise level, they have generally done a few things today, right? They're generally not taking just a chat GPT out of the box.
mm,
They're generally taking a model, they're testing against that specific model. They're probably taking content to specific to their use case. They're doing a RAG type of system that is feeding in some context to that model and asking it to answer specific to that context.
mm,
So it does then come down to a use case. It might be a fairly broad use case, but we can then test against that use case still, even if it's fairly broad. We
mm,
do some scope testing and what happens when you start to ask your customer chat bot questions about what stocks should I invest in, or how to make a bomb,
yes.
right? And see what happens and make sure that's buttoned down. But generally at the enterprise level, we're still talking about fairly discrete use cases, and
Yeah.
we can test against those, even if it's quite broad.
Mm,
And that's fine. Um, it does increase the chance that you are misrepresenting. So, um, to your point, your test sets might be different from how it ends up getting used, and especially over time.
mm,
So we do put in clauses, and this is where maturity again helps, right? They should be monitoring, for a system like that, they should be looking for drift. They should be looking for areas of underperformance, or areas where they might not have expected or had
mm,
a dearth of testing. So that's why we do look at the maturity side of this as
mm,
well, and why it's important to have some of these tools to be able to efficiently, repeat their testing, for
mm,
example, right? To be able to understand how it performed at time B and time C down the line, and make sure that they don't have those gaps, right? That's part of their maturity, and having the right infrastructure in place to do that.
mm. Okay, yeah, that's clear. And as always in these topics, the underlying procedures that you follow and the underlying thinking that hopefully happened before is
Before
extremely
and
important, and
after and
during, yeah,
and
exactly.
during, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah. It's
Okay, we're almost at the end of our conversation, so maybe one last question: where do you think these fields will will go? What's the trajectory that you see in the next 1 to 3 years?
um, I really believe that uh, AI will be powerful for huge efficiency gains. I think that we have to be very mature in how we deploy it, especially in regulated areas or areas where that of high impact. Um, and to do that, we'll need the right level of maturity. I believe and hope that the sort of model risk management will meet that meet that requirement, and help champion responsible and trusted AI through. Otherwise, there'll be a big back backlash. So it needs to be used appropriately. beyond that, I think there's a lot of disruption that will happen, more broadly, and there's bigger questions, societal questions. But I think that one thing we can control is that we can do this in a mature, thoughtful way, and it's exciting times to
Mhm.
be in this field.
Yeah, definitely. And well, we are also always wondering if, like, how this field is going to be named in a few years' time, because we are still talking about model risk management, but on the other hand, model risk has often this connotation of being fairly regulatory driven. It's an exercise in trying to, like, fit all the rules and guidelines, while if we talk about maybe AI risk management, maybe people think a bit more about it as an engineering topic. So what would be your prediction here? How will this
Uh,
field be named in 2 years' time, say?
I actually think that and it'll be fun to go back and watch this. I
Yes.
actually think that that model, we think of things as these large AI models, and I think it's at the model level that a lot of the testing has to happen, and
Mhm.
uh, I think that will spread to become more of a normalized term
Mhm.
as the field matures. So that would be my bet, and we'll
Okay,
we'll
well,
see
the
how
bets
right we
are
are or not.
the
And
bets are on, definitely.
I also think
Okay.
that it will, there'll be a bunch of positive nudges forward, right? So
Mhm.
I think being able to offer insurance and warranties and being able to,
Yeah.
these are positive nudges towards maturity. And so I think the the field will necessarily have to embrace
Mhm.
model risk management, the next generation of that.
Yeah.
And together, that combined with standards, combined with regulation, combined with insurance, these will all be nudges towards embracing model risk management.
Mhm. Okay, well, couldn't have said this better then. Thanks a lot for this very interesting conversation. And yeah, hope to see you next time. Thank you. Bye for now.
Yeah, thanks, Jess, for having me. Great to see you too.
Bye.